So Nakamura is like the tactical guy. He likes to attack and sacrifice, and Magnus Carlsen is the positional player who likes to win in the end game. At least that's the book on those two players. Now, we know that they can play any style they want, but when they're playing each other, if we hear that a tactical game took place, we think maybe that favors Nakamura, a positional endgame grind that favors Carlsen. Well, in this game, things do not go as expected in terms of the style of the two players. This is the Speed Chess Championship. 5 minutes for each side with a 1 second increment. Quite a bit of money on the line. This entire Speed Chess Championship, there's a $100,000 prize fund, but this particular match was for $10,000. So a lot of pressure. Nakamura has the white pieces in this game, and Carlsen has black. Let's jump right in. Knight to f3, knight f6, d4. And b6 was played by Magnus. Obviously, what he wants to do is control this e4 square. Develop the bishop at b7 with the knight at f6. Control e4. E6 is also quite common, along with d5. Now c4. Standard idea, Queen's Gambit ideas, wants to control the center, the d5 square. Bishop to b7, continuing the plan. And now g3, a very modern, very common idea of fine ketoing on the king's side for white. And here, black plays an interesting move. He plays e5. So Magnus has created a situation where Hikaru cannot take the pawn with the knight, which is what he would want to do, because he would just lose his rook, right? So he takes with the pawn, and now the knight goes to g4, threatening to take the pawn, and he's going to get his material back, and he's helped dissolve Nakamura's center. Bishop g2, knight to e5, and again, you don't want to take because bishop g2 favors black. Knight b to d2. Hikaru defends his knight on f3, wants to keep everything nice and tight. Knight f3 check, knight f3. Now, in my database, white has a massive plus score in this position. I mean, it's like 90%. But if you use a computer or even just the eyeball test, white has a slight lead in development and a little bit more space, and that's it. I mean, this is pretty much an equal position, even though white scores well here. Bishop to b4 check was played by Magnus. Bishop to d2. Another pair of pieces are exchanged. So now it's knight and bishop versus knight and bishop. Castles, castles. And basically, it's what we just said. White has a bit more space and a slight lead in development, and that is it. We'll see if Nakamura can make anything out of those small advantages. Carlsen plays a5. So he's trying to preserve this c5 square by preventing white from playing b4. He can play the knight to a6 and to c5, and that knight would be well placed on that square. And Nakamura plays rook f to d1. This is actually the novelty of the game. Previously, rook a to d1 had been played. It's not a real different, but rook f to d1. Obviously, if the knight moves, the d7 pawn would be under threat. The rook is opposite black's queen, and rook e8 was played by Carlsen, obviously putting some pressure on e2. Rook a to c1, completing his development, and he would like to play c5 and create a pawn weakness in Magnus Carlsen's position. The best move, it appears to be, was queen to e7. It helps control the c5 square, and it also aims at e2. So this was a powerful idea, but instead Magnus played d6 and used this pawn to help control the c5 square. There's only one problem. It doesn't actually control the square because there's a pin along this d-file. And so Nakamura just goes ahead and plays c5 anyway. He gets the pawn structure damage he was looking for. Pawn takes, rook takes c5. He's putting pressure on c7. He's attacking a5 twice, and Carlsen has to do something about that, so he advances the pawn. The rook retreats to c4. Another strong idea was queen to c3. Putting more pressure on c7. If knight a6, rook to b4, bishop e4, rook g5, attacking g6. And white has a nice attacking formation. Rook to c4 was played, knight to d7. Still wants to play that knight to the c5 square. Queen to c2, aiming at c7. Now first, a3 was played. A sneaky move Carlsen could have played was rook to a7. Now it looks like it just drops the c7 pawn, but if Naka were to take it, then bishop to e4 counterattacks the queen and the rook, and black would be in very good shape in that position. But Magnus goes ahead and plays a3. Now knight to g5. So obviously, Nakamura is threatening to play queen h7 check, causing a lot of trouble for black. But he's also unleashing this bishop on the bishop at b7. So it forces the next sequence. Carlsen takes the knight at g5, but now bishop takes b7, rook a to b8, and you see Hikaru is playing incredibly strong positional chess. He now has a better minor piece than Magnus does. The bishop's stronger than the knight in this position. Rook takes c7, so now he's got material as well. But there is pressure still on his queen side that he's going to have to deal with. A b2, queen takes b2, and there is a pin on the bishop at b7. It's defended for the moment. Knight to c5, adding to the pressure of this pawn, of this knight. Rook takes d6. So now Hikaru has won 2 pawns. That's a big deal. So he's the one that's grabbed the material, and let's see if he can out-positional. Well, how would I say that? Play the game, better positional game than Carlsen. Protect the material and win in the endgame. Knight to e6 was played by Magnus. What if he just goes ahead and takes the bishop here? Well, in that case, rook takes b7, and you exchange on b7. After queen c1 check, the queen attacks e2 and a2, but rook a6 protects the a2 pawn. Queen takes a2, and this may look like black has done a good job, got back a pawn, and has a real fighting chance at an endgame, but he actually doesn't, because Hikaru would play rook to a8, forcing the exchange of rooks. And believe it or not, this is completely winning for white, because queen plus this extra pawn just beats this queen easily, because this queen controls any checks that Carlsen might deliver. This is actually totally winning. So Carlsen does not want to go into this position. So he plays the knight to e6, attacking the rook at c7. Rook c4, g6, stopping any back rank threats and any potential attacks on g7. By the way, if you're getting value from this video, be sure to hit the subscribe and the like button and the bell notification for future videos. So rook to b6. Hikaru relieves the pin on the bishop at b7. Queen to a5. Magnus knows he's got to do something about that a-pawn. If he can't, he's going to be in big trouble. Rook to b5 counterattacks the queen. The queen goes to a7, staying on this a2 pawn. a4, advancing the pawn. Now it is defended, obviously, by the rook at c4. Rook e to d8, threatening checks on the back rank that could cause some problems. Bishop comes to f3. He's sort of tightening things up. Hikaru knows he plays king to g2. He's going to have a solid position. Rook b to c8. A pair of rooks come off the board. Rook to b4, defending the pawn at a4, and the rook now has lateral movement from both sides of the board. h5, h4, and queen to a5. Magnus has blockaded the a4 pawn. He's putting pressure on the rook at b4, so that limits where white's queen can go. He can't leave the rook undefended. So king to g2, rook to d8, rook to c4. So he moves the rook out of the way. The queen is no longer on it. And now he wants to basically play the queen to b5, maybe even exchange queens and win in the endgame. The queen goes to a6, putting pressure on the c4 rook. Queen to b5, offering to trade down. Now, Magnus can't do that. He's got to keep queens on the board because he has to preserve some tactical chances against Hikaru's king. So he goes to d6, a5. Obviously, this pawn is very hard to stop at this point. Queen to a3, moving behind the pawn. Maybe he can slow it down that way. But Hikaru plays this move, bishop to d5. And this is a very powerful move. Basically, he's threatening to take the knight at e6. If he does that, he would destroy black's kingside pawn structure, and that would just be it. He has a 2-pawn advantage in this position, and even if Carlsen doesn't allow him to take the knight, Hikaru still has a vastly superior minor piece. And with 2 pawns extra, the better minor piece, and a safer king, Carlsen resigned in this position, and Hikaru Nakamura beat Magnus in Magnus's own style of play. Now, even after going over this great game from Hikaru Nakamura, there is still some great chess that you are missing out on. To fix that problem, believe it or not, the video you're going to want to check out is this video right here. She'll be sure to check that out and enjoy some wonderful chess. See you again soon.